but oh, that was.
Oh, wait. We have a couple stragglers.
Well, wait.
Carol and George. Where's Dave and Annabelle? They're straggling too. Yeah, there was too much cards last night, right?
Beat up all night.
You didn't take us home till after 11.
Jim and Mary.
Pastor,
That's all right.
keeping you guys up playing.
I'm gonna browbeat everybody that came in late this morning. That's all right. I'll give them the old frown.
Come on, checkbook out of here.
Joe, when Joan beats you, that's a problem.
You talking about me?
No, we're talking about the other Joan. You know the other Joan, right?
No.
The one from Ocean City?
The old Jim,
Somebody was to get smacked this morning, is that it?
the old man's here.
Are you threatening me, Joan? I might have to box your ears if you don't stop it.
I might have to smack somebody this morning.
Uh-oh. Good morning. We're just waiting. Make sure everybody gets in the door. Look at this. Look at this. Oh, here's Nancy. We're live on YouTube, so I'm announcing everybody that's arriving right now. So everybody on YouTube's hearing
What's the
who's
date
coming
again?
in.
What's the date?
The date is the 24th, 11/24.
Okay.
You, phew.
Our electricity went out this morning.
Stevie, whenever I get asked the date, sometimes it's like, oh, what is the date? You know, if you don't know the date, sometimes it's a little embarrassing. But I happen to have it right here in an old noggin. All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Glad y'all could make it. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, ask His blessing for this morning's study, and we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for all that came out this morning, and just pray that this morning's lesson will be a blessing as we go through a great story, one of the most well-studied stories and popular stories in the history of all stories, even amongst all of our Sunday school lessons, the story of David and Goliath. So such a blessing to go through what happened there and the Valley of Elah. And so just open up our hearts and minds to your word this morning. And I just pray that this morning's lesson will be a blessing to all of us applications that we can continue to apply to our lives. And I pray all this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Now, for those of you who are just coming in this week, there's 2 sets of notes. We will be on 1 Samuel 17, 1 through 30. That's what we're going to finish up this morning. If you go all the way back past all the pages, the pictures, and you go back to page 7, you can open up your notes and go to page 7 because when we finish reading, we'll be right there. And we really just have to finish page 7 and 8. And then after that, we will get started and get into the new notes. And we will probably not finish the new notes, but we'll at least begin them. All right, so usually what I do is I have an introduction review, and we just review. But instead of just doing a very typical review this morning, we're just going to read. All right, I'm going to read the first 30 verses of 1 Samuel chapter 17. So if you would like to turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 17, 1 Samuel chapter 17, I'm going to read the first 30 verses. And of course, at the very end, at the 30th verse, then I'm going to have you, if you haven't already, open up your notes to page 7. And then you will begin and study and look at those with me. Okay, everybody good? 1 Samuel chapter 17. And of course, I'm going to read the first 30 verses. So bear with me. Now, the Philistines gathered armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. And they camped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes Damim. Now, Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. Verse 3, the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And of course, Harry, if you bring up the valley overhead, we have a good picture of the valley of Elah, which was 2 hills with the valley in between. Right there on the PowerPoint. Anyway, they'll bring them up and you can just take a look, and I want you to visualize as we're studying this. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, we talked about 6 cubits in a span was about 9 feet, 9 inches tall, and that was very a liberal guess. He probably is well over 10 feet tall, maybe even closer to 11. A liberal guess, a very low guess, is 9 feet 9. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, and we said that was about 125 to 126 pounds, which is almost a full person on your body here. That's a lot. He also had a bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and we had the picture last week of a family who were standing next to this big, tall spear and how big it looked compared to that family. Look, that's a big, big javelin, spear. So it was as thick as a weaver's beam. It was a very, very strong beam on a loom. And the head of the spear, you could see the head up top, weighed 600 shekels of iron. It's about 15 pounds. And again, 15 pounds is not a lot of weight, but if you put 15 pounds at the end of a long shafted spear, you had to have pretty strong forearms to hold that thing and throw it. So no doubt Goliath was mammoth. This man was huge. His shield carrier also walked before him. So when he came out in the battlefield, he didn't even hold his own shield. There was a man who went before Goliath and held this big shield and walked on the battlefield. He was probably a big, strong man, and I can't imagine how big this shield was. Now he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array. And we're going to talk today what battle array was. Am I not the Philistine? This is verse 8. And you, the servants of Saul, choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Verse 10. Again the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Now when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. Verse 12, and Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced in years among men. Now the 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and the second to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. Now the Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. Verse 17, then Jesse said to David his son, take now for your brothers an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves and run to the camp to your brothers. Bring also these 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000 and look into the welfare of your brothers and bring back news of them. Verse 19, and for Saul and they all had men of Israel, for Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So David rose up early in the morning, left the flock with a keeper, took the supplies, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry. Verse 21, Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. And as he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. And when all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him, and they were greatly afraid. Verse 25, the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? And the people answered him according to the word, saying, thus it will be done for the man who kills him. Whereas they repeat what this was that Saul was offering. So they repeat it to David. Verse 28, now Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David. And he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle. But David said, what have I done now? Was it not just a question? And we'll finish in verse 30. Then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing, asked him the same thing. Well, what is this offer from Saul? And the people answered the same thing as before. Now, page 7. As we finished verse 30, we're on page 7 in the last week's notes. We take a look at where we began in verse 12. So verses 12 to 14, and you can look in your Bibles or you can look in the notes. We look at those 3 verses. Once again, the author is establishing David's roots and family situation during the Battle of Elah. In other words, what was the status of the king, or the future king of Israel, the Nagid? What was going on here? David's father was Jesse, it's just a repeat, a resident of Bethlehem, whose fighting days were over. You wonder, why was at Jesse's age very important? What was the comment here by the author? The reason Jesse was not on the battlefield, the author explains, was that he was advanced in years among men. In other words, Jesse was older. That's why he stayed home. He was no longer fighting age. But his 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, volunteered in Saul's army. I think the idea was they weren't part of Saul's regular army or standing army, but they volunteered once this battle began, or once the Philistines began their trek into Israel. Saul called for the volunteers, and Jesse was not obligated to send all 8 sons. He'd send his oldest 3 to volunteer, and he sent them off. And it mentions that David was the youngest. The author tells us in verse 15 that David traveled back and forth from his service to Saul to his father's flocks in Bethlehem. So in other words, it's important to establish, where was David at this time? He was in Bethlehem. The understanding would be that David was relieved of duty at this time because he was playing the harp. He was playing music for Saul. He was relieved of duty because of the trouble with the Philistines. Saul wasn't receiving court at this time. It was more important for him to be in this battle. So David was relieved of duty. He's in Bethlehem. He would be in Bethlehem to tend his father's sheep. And in verse 16, we are told that by the time the setting of this story occurs, Goliath had been issuing these challenges for 40 straight days. By the time David arrives on the battlefield. So this author in these verses is setting this, he's setting it up. What's going on here? Where is everybody? What's the situation? Now, it is funny because most of us probably think that the care package is a more recent modern concept. I mean, we use care packages because our sons and daughters go off to college, and we want to make sure they're okay because they're flat broke. College students don't have 2 pennies to rub together, right? And so, I mean, think about it, Rose. How many care packages have you sent to Caitlin over the years to get her through? I mean, so we think, oh, you know, this is an American modern invention now that our kids go away to college. Oh, no, look at this in the text we see. And we're going to see these parallels between our time, and we see 3,000 years ago, and the more things change, the more things stay the same. And we're going to see the actions of Jesse is the same thing, actions that we have for our children here today. So weird. The care package, it's nothing new. It's at least 3,000 years old. So we send these care packages for our children, but it's nothing new. Jesse is going to send his youngest son, David, to the battlefield with a care package for his brothers. That's what this is all about. Go, bring some food to your brothers. Also, there's a few different things that Jesse's doing here. The idea of giving gifts to the people in charge of your children is nothing new. It's not an American invention. It's not a modern invention. We give gifts to our children's teachers and principals and other in charge of their welfare. And this happens even in military families where you take care of your son or daughter's direct commander. You know, send them a care package, send them something, give them a gift, right? Oh, this is new. Oh, no, Jesse is thinking the same thing. You notice that he's going to give a gift to the commander in charge of his 3 sons. And he sends David off with some food and some supplies for him. Jesse is doing his due diligence. Now, the last part, and a very important part, was about news. So you would say, why is Jesse doing this? For 3 reasons. The third reason, news. The only way Jesse was going to hear about this battle was by word of mouth. So he loaded up his son David with supplies. And we talked about where was the Valley of Elah, about 15 miles west. And we saw, if you could bring up the map where it shows the arrows on there. Okay, you see the purple arrow, all right, heading almost directly west, and you see where you have the red cross, the swords crossed. That's where the Valley of Elah is. And so David would have traveled 15 miles west to the battlefield. Now you take a look and say, well, in ancient times, how fast could David travel? And they say an ancient Israelite could, and anybody during this time period, could travel about 15 to 20 miles a day. So what do we have here? David got up real early in the morning, right? So he probably would have traveled all day, made it pretty close to the battle, but he doesn't want to approach the battle at night and alert me. So he probably stayed overnight somewhere close to the Valley of Elah, camped out, got up early in the morning so he could receive his brothers, get done what he needed to get done. He goes out early in the morning to the battlefield. And so that gives us our setting. So probably a day later, the next day, David arrives at the battlefield early in the morning and makes it there in about a day's travel, 24 hours. And that's the idea. Now in verse 20, it says that David rose up early in the morning. He left his father's flock with a keeper, then made the trek to the battlefield. Now, this is not a one-on-one shadow or type, but I want us to think about something here that we see, because lots of times, remember, that Messiah and David are closely related. And we see that David lots of times provides a type and a shadow of the future Messiah. Not only is it by blood relation, we see David has that type and shadow. So I want you to think about this. The shepherd, who right now is just a shepherd, who one day will be king, leaves his father's flock with a trusted keeper. What does that sound like? I'm going to leave you with what? The Holy Spirit. To fight a battle for God's people, to defeat an ancient enemy. So the first fight is as a shepherd on the battlefield, and that's literal, but if you take a little type and shadow, the Lord Jesus Christ making that fight as shepherd, dying on the cross. Of course, it ended in the Lord's death, but he actually crushed Satan's head. He won the battle. And we see this with David, and it's just something to keep in mind. He fights this battle as a shepherd, but one day he's going to be a warrior king. He'll always be our shepherd, but he also will take on a kingship and come into his kingdom. So will David, right? And so we see this little type and shadow here, which I thought was pretty neat. David arrived right in the morning, just as the Israelite troops were again taking their positions for another day of what had become a standoff between the opposing armies, right? And here's the idea here, because you don't get that in the text. What is happening? Well, when it says that they form into battle array, it's not that all the Israelite soldiers stood on the very edge of the hill and started screaming and shouting across to the Philistines. I think the idea is they actually sent a group of troops that would walk down into the valley, whatever, and this is forming up in battle array. And this is a saber rattling. If you've watched, I don't know, did you ever watch, what was the one with Mel Gibson? Braveheart, right? Well, remember when the Scottish army was all shaking themselves at them and yelling and screaming? They got their bows in the air. Okay, so this is saber rattling, and both armies would do this. So you had David's arriving as the group of Israelite troops were heading down, probably at the very edge of the mountain, the hill. So in case they had to retreat, they had the high ground, and they would stand on their side. And the Philistines did the same thing, and they do a little saber rattling and yelling and screaming and at each other and all that. So we see this is they're forming battle array. They're getting down there. They're going down and this is what's happening when David arrives. Now, here's another thing that is a modern thing, but you didn't realize this. David checks his luggage with the doorman, right? He checks his luggage with the doorman. That's nothing new. When we go to the hotel, we check his luggage. Well, David takes all his stuff. He doesn't just leave it anywhere. He checks it with the baggage handler, it says, right? So he checks it with the doorman, and he runs to the battle lines to check on his brothers. But David, like any curious man, would be eager to see the fighting. Of course, he's eager beaver. The fighting is going to be, going to see the battlefield, and he's going to see his brothers. So he's eager, and he runs down. And what David witnessed was this mountain of a man from the Philistines hurling challenges and insults to Israel. So one of the things that's different about this is Israel forms a battle array. The Philistines come down in battle array. They shake their sabers at each other and yell and scream. But then, boom, 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 out comes Goliath. He walks out from amongst the Philistines. This is different. And he walks towards the Israelite side of the valley. And he's hurling all kinds of challenges and insults. And David is observing this. Ooh, he sees this mountain of a man come out and start to insult Israel. David observes a fear among his brethren as they don't seem to move a muscle to respond, even kind of shrinking back as he approaches. So if I was standing at the edge of the hill, I don't care how close Goliath got, I still have the high ground, and this whole battle wouldn't make sense. But there's a bunch of Israelites that are actually in the valley, and as Goliath makes his way across and it's a pretty big valley, they start to go, whoa, here he comes. and they're shrinking back, and they're starting to walk up the mountain, and some of them are who had edged themselves pretty far onto the valley, they start to, back up a little bit. So here comes the big guy. Yeah, and David's observing this. So he sees this big guy coming out. He's hurling insults, and he sees that not only is most of the men not willing to move a muscle. I mean, they're not moving. And he hears the insults, but they're kind of shrinking back. Then he overhears a discussion. We call this scuttlebutt, right? The Army always has scuttlebutt. I mean, if you stand in a group of soldiers, you can pretty much get all the rumors and things that are going on there. And David overhears a discussion. Some of the soldiers are talking about Saul's reward for the man who would kill Goliath. Now, Saul has offered that that man his daughter's hand in marriage. In other words, the soldier who kills Goliath would instantly be a member of the royal family. He would be a relation to Saul. I mean, that's a great honor. And so David hears about this offer to marry off his own daughter. Also, this man and his family would be exempt from paying taxes. I mean, imagine if that was the case for us. You did something for the government, and the president said, well, we're going to exempt you from paying all taxes. I mean, that would be a pretty good thing. So, and the person was not only exempt from paying taxes, he would be given some sort of monetary reward. So the offer was, I'm going to make you rich, you're going to marry into my family, and you're going to be exempt from a lot of monetary obligations to the monarchy. I mean, this is a great offer that Saul is made. Now, we're going to now transition right now, this second, we're transitioning our mind to David, because it's really extremely important for us to kind of monitor where David's at, and whereas all the adults, every single adult on this battlefield and where their mind is compared to where David's mind is. And in doing that, we're going to get a very key, very important encouragement throughout the rest of this chapter. See, here's David. David can hardly believe what he is hearing. This is a total different than the horrified looks of fear that is on the faces of the grown, grizzled warriors of Israel. David can't believe it in his youthful exuberance and what I'm going to argue is a childlike faith, and we're going to talk about this as we move into the next lesson. He realizes that in his own mind, all someone has to do is kill this one man, just kill this one loudmouth, and that Israelite would be able to marry into the royal family, and his entire family would have no more burdensome financial obligations to the monarchy. He would be set for life, and so would his family. David was wondering in his own mind, listen to his own mind, why men aren't lining up to take advantage of this incredible offer. As a matter of fact, he's probably looking for the line right now going, oh, where's the line of guys at? I'm going to get in that line. Wait, it's over there? No, nobody's lining up to do this. They're all just standing there in fear. And David in his youth is saying, whoa, hold on a second. Are you serious? Now, David, you could see in his own mind, he's already got some machinations going, but of course, as usual, you got to verify. He wants to make sure that this is true. This is not just one rumor, right? So he's like, he can't believe this. And added to this is his thought about what is going on here and what Goliath is doing. He asks, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? Now, calling Goliath uncircumcised, is meant to underscore the fact that Goliath was not only a Gentile, but an actual enemy of God himself. Goliath was God's enemy. Goliath was the enemy of Israel. He was challenging God's army. David doesn't understand this. It bothered David to his core, to this very being, that such a man would be allowed to babble on like this in such a blasphemous manner, and not one Israelite would lift a finger to shut this heathen up. And I was supposed to be not one and for all, once and for all. Where is the line of men in Israel who wants to shut this man up? How dare he speak about our God in this way? This is David's attitude. Look at the difference. He's only a boy, maybe a late teen. Maybe you could argue that David was 20 and 21. Whatever age, he's young. And you can't believe that. Again, there's no line. And how are they letting this occur? Why would we sit back and let this one single man, no matter how big he is, and David's not even looking at the man's size. He don't care. What an attitude. Look at this. So when David keeps on asking questions about the situation, right, he's trying to say, he just wants to verify. David already has his mind moving. I think I'm going to go out and face this guy. I would just want to verify, is this true? He's asking. It starts to annoy his older brother Eliab. Now, Eliab responds to David's bravado the way most older brothers were. And my thought here is, don't think of Eliab. He's not being mean. He's not calling David evil. It's so like older brothers and younger brothers. And you can see what happened here. David's out there. He's starting to ask some of these soldiers, what's going on? He's up there. Eliab and his older brother is probably just annoyed with David. Like, go home. All right, you delivered your stuff. You think you know it all. You're just a boy. Just get out of here. In other words, so you look at it and you kind of see this back and forth. In other words, he more or less tells him to shut up because he has no idea what he's talking about. He has no idea to talk about. And in the language of the text seems to designate like a deeper anger from Eliab that I don't think is necessary. It's just not like that. But I believe we can completely understand what is happening here. It's another case which we are thousands of years in the past, but the same thing could happen in 2024. David is becoming a nuisance. We know this. By asking these questions, and like many other older brothers, Eliab just wants David to go away. But this interaction doesn't deter David, right? As we read, who merely goes on and asks someone else about the king's offer. His brothers are annoyed, so he goes and asks somebody else. So he's trying to verify what the deal is. So David has decided in his mind, I want us to think, that if this offer is really true, and he can verify it, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to fight. Yeah, he'll do it. Then he was going to shut this uncircumcised Philistine down. And what I wanted to end with last week, and we ended here, is in a hillside valley filled with grown men and hardened warriors, this young man is going to be the only one with enough faith to face Goliath in the name of Jehovah, the God of Israel. He has already decided. New notes. We are in 1 Samuel 17. We're going to go from 31 to 53. A childlike faith. So I've been kind of setting this up, giving us the alley-oop. We'll talk about David's faith here. And I'm going to use the term childlike here. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. David's faith stands stark against the backdrop of the valley of Elah, and it is this faith that is the center of our study this morning, or at least the finishing aspect of our study this morning. The question we have to ask is this, and we ask this on a human level, not a spiritual level, just look at a human level. How could a young man, still probably a teen or young 20, have enough faith to face a grown, battle-tested warrior with enormous size and strength in a one-on-one fight? Was David naive? Was he insane? Was he just young and dumb? Why would I say young and dumb? Well, we know teens, right? If you guys, everybody that studies Sharon, you know teens, right? What is one of the main characteristics of teenagers? They're risk takers, right? That's why we try to talk them out of drunk driving and those kinds of things. Teens they have risk behaviors that are very dangerous for them. Teens and young people are known for thinking of themselves as invincible. So was that the case here with David? I mean, real adults were sitting here and they weren't going to take a chance on risking their life to fight Goliath. But here is this teen who's exhibiting a risk behavior to go after this behemoth of a man. Is that what that is? And I would argue no. David had the empowering influence of the Holy Spirit in his life coupled with a childlike faith. that we're going to talk about. That's what drove David. This combination left David feeling that he couldn't lose when he finally stood face to face with Goliath. David thought he couldn't lose. It never entered his mind that he could lose to Goliath. His faith is an example for us all. That's why I'm bringing it out. It's a faith that we're called to have. So let's pick up our story in verse 31. And I'm going to start, and you can stay in your notes, and you can read along in the Bible if you would like. I'm just going to pick up at 31 to 40, and then I'll have some questions if you want to pause a little bit after this section. So let's take a look at verses 31 to 40 and continue in our story here. Of course, David had asked around, and he's verifying the story. And then in verse 31, it says, when the words which David spoken were heard, they, and we don't know who they are, told them to Saul. And he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Then Saul said to David, you were not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. Verse 34, but David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and took the lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant had killed both lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. And then Saul clothed David with his garments, armor, put on his bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. And David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. Now, he took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag, which he had, even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So let's just take a look at the bottom of page 1 on your new notes as we kind of look at what happened here in verses 31 through 40. See, David's inquiries, these questioning, these conversations were overheard by an unidentified soldier or soldiers who apparently had direct access to King Saul. When he or they understood that this teen was deadly serious about facing Goliath, he or they, whoever they were, went and told the king. Basically, there's this young shepherd boy, he's saying he's going to face Goliath, and so they told the king. Then the king summoned David. In David's youthful exuberance and with, I argue, great faith, he explained to Saul that nobody needs to worry anymore about this loudmouth Philistine. Don't worry about him. David had already decided that he would go out and fight Goliath himself and take care of what had become a pretty embarrassing dilemma for Israel. And why was it embarrassing? This is a stalemate, 40 days. But one in which Goliath continued to taunt Israel and their God. So the Philistine army didn't make any advances, and neither did the Israelite army. But boy, this embarrassment of the Philistines sending out Goliath and Goliath taunting Israel and cursing their God is an embarrassment. And David says, don't worry about this guy. And you can imagine the amused initial reaction of King Saul as this young shepherd boy stood before him wearing nothing but his shepherd garments, right? I mean, he's not in warrior's armor. Everybody's armored up. But this young shepherd boy comes in, and he's got his staff in his hand, right? And he's got these garments on, and he's saying, I'm going to slap down this Philistine. I'll take care of him. And Saul must have been, okay, young one. That sounds good. I hear you. Saul then responded, right, that it was foolhardy at best to think that he, as a mere boy, could go out and fight this enormous Philistine. Goliath, he points out, had been trained as a warrior since he was a child. He was not only enormously big, he was a grizzled veteran of war. This is not going to end well. So no, he told David, this does not seem like a plausible idea. Thank you for your offer, but you're just too young. You have no armor on. There's no way. Saul probably wasn't concerned that some shepherd boy might get himself killed. And I want you to look at Saul. And we don't know this for a fact, but think about Saul. He probably wasn't worried about wasting David, and David died. It was not a big deal. Saul was probably worried that he would look foolish by sending out this young boy who would die rather quickly. I mean, everybody in the Israelite army would know that David was going to go out in the battlefield, and Goliath was going to cut him down rather quickly. And it would look foolish to Saul, and actually all Israel would be looking foolish to send out this boy to battle. So he's not convinced, and he's balking because he's going to look like a fool. And recall, the Philistines might collect on their challenge to make Israel their slaves when David lost. Right? So Saul's also worried about, well, the deal was if you send somebody out to fight Goliath and we lose, that will become your servants. In other words, no battle, will just automatically surrender. And so Saul's in a pickle here, being here in this stalemate and not wanting to move forward. And we've seen Saul in the past balk when he doesn't know the outcome. If he knows the outcome is guaranteed, Saul's, let's go. He's ready to rock. We've seen that. When Saul doesn't know what the outcome might be, he's had a tendency to balk, to wait and see, and not make a move. And so 40 days he hasn't made a move on the Philistines. Again, let me point out the obvious. He didn't sacrifice. Samuel's nowhere to be found. There's no high priest anywhere. He's not asking the Lord's direction in this battle. There's nothing like that going on here. Have we noticed that? Where's the spiritual component of this whole thing for Saul? There is none. He's in bad shape spiritually. But David went on to explain to Saul in what I think, and sometimes my brain works different than others. I mean, I read this section. Don't say anything, Rose. I hear. But I read this and I was dying. I thought it was actually funny, and I'm sure at the time it wasn't funny. But I just think it's a funny part of the story that he's basically telling King Saul, listen, I am qualified to face Goliath because of my experience as a shepherd. Imagine what that would have sounded to King Saul. Wait, hold on a second. Before you say no and you shut this whole thing down, hold on. Let me explain. So you want to talk Saul into this. I'm going to use my experience as a shepherd. But listen to what he says to Saul. David explains that he fought off many lions and bears to perfect his father's sheep. As his shepherd, and Saul would know this, it was his duty to put his life on the line for his sheep and to protect them from whatever predator might come and prey on the flock. That was the duty of the shepherd, who understood. Okay. As a side note, and I just put this in here, lions and bears were common in the land of Canaan during this time period. So some people call in the question, were there lions and bears? And actually, it was a common occurrence. People could get attacked by lions and bears. So don't think that they weren't in the land. They were. So David would have commonly fought off lions and bears to protect the sheep. He wasn't embellishing anything. He had a lot of experience in fighting off lions and bears. And whenever that lion and bear rose up against him, he would grab it by the hair and kill it. David's obvious correlation, that he would simply treat this Philistine Goliath exactly like those lions and bears. So a lion came up and took a sheep, and David followed it, took the sheep out of his mouth, grabbed that lion by the mane, and slapped that lion down a little bit, right? He gave him a few slaps. He beat that lion down and killed it with a stick. I mean, that's what David's saying to him. So basically, when I go out against Goliath, he's going to come at me. I'm going to grab Goliath by his beard. I'm going to slap him around just like I did that lion and kill him. I mean, think about the humor here that's going on here. So just like that old lion bear, he's not going to grab Goliath by his mane. He's going to grab him by his beard, basically, and he's going to slap him around a little bit, and he's done. Yeah. And of course, he's correlating this, making this correlation for Saul's mind. And Saul must have thought something like, man, this boy has some bravado, right? I mean, Saul at this point is like, oh my goodness, what is coming out of this young boy's mouth? This boy has some vibrato. David finishes with the fact that he knows in his mind the Lord will give him the victory since he, Goliath, has defied the armies of the living God. So as a cherry on top, David's argument is not only have I fought off lions and bears, I want to treat Goliath exactly in this manner, but I have the Lord on my side, and Goliath has been defying the armies of the living God. Goliath is in big trouble with God. And so David's last argument to him is, I have God on my side now. Look at what this big Philistine has been saying. He's made it personal. Uh-oh. He's made it personal. What David actually says is that Israel's army is the army of Elohim Kaim. And Elohim Kaim, translated, is the living God. Today, as Bible students, we find that there are many titles and names, if we do our studies, given to God for very specific reasons. El Shaddai, El Elyon, Jehovah Jireh. Okay? We have Jehovah Jireh on the back AV stand, right, in the back wall there. That's right. Names given to God tell us about some aspect of his attributes and character. All right? They're not his specific name, they're his reputation. That's who he is. And it's pointing to a characteristic of himself. That's why we have names. This Hebrew title has a very specific meaning. It's telling us about God. It's telling us about one aspect of him, or a couple different aspects of him. It means that as compared to other gods, Jehovah was an active participant in the lives of men. He is the controller of human history. In other words, it's emphasizing God's sovereignty over human events. Elohim Kaim, the living God. The God of Israel determines outcomes and personally balances the scales of justice according to his will. Joshua was explaining this to the people when he used the same title in Joshua 3. This is what Joshua says using Elohim Kaim. And Joshua said, by this you will know that the living God, Elohim Kaim, is among you, that he will assuredly drive out from you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. This is before they conquered the land. The living God, he used that expression. Psalm 84 uses that title. You can read that on your own. You read Psalm 84, Elohim Kaim, the living God. So what does this mean? What is David saying? The reason why I'm going to win is, to David, God is not sitting idly by on his perch in heaven. Like, God's just sitting there, he's in heaven, and he's not involved in human events. To David, that's not the case. He's not just sitting there watching. His fellow Hebrews were treating God in this manner. The reason why they had no courage is because to them, God wasn't with them on this battlefield. How much courage would they have gathered if they realized Elohim Kaim was with them? But yet they were sitting and treating God as if he's not involved in human events. He's in heaven. Of course he's their God. Jehovah, Yud-He, Vav-He. But was he really here? Was he really involved in this particular battle? Well, he was busy. He was busy in heaven. Not to David. To David, God was not sitting idly by. David knew his fellow Hebrews were treating God in this manner, but God was actively involved in the affairs of his people, and he, to David, was certainly with them on this battlefield, and he was going to be with David. Goliath had been making a fatal error by taunting the living God of Israel. Goliath made this personal. And that's not a good place to be in. David understood this. Now, he would certainly be with Goliath when he faced him one-on-one. David. Sorry. The Lord would be with David when he faced Goliath one-on-one. David also understood another thing, bottom of page 2, that this was not just about one army's strong man versus the other. David understood this fight existed on a spiritual plane, that there was a spiritual part of this battle. It had nothing to do with armor, clothing, strength, size, age. It was about this one man and his nation's defiance against God himself, Elohim Kaim. Yud-He Vav-He. This man had to be silenced, and David was going to be God's instrument of justice. You think, well, this couldn't have been going on in David's head. It had to have been David's thinking. Had to have been David's thinking. He was not afraid of this man. It was an awful thing for David. Why wasn't it awful for the rest of these grown-ups in Israel? It was awful for David to hear how badly God's reputation was being tarnished over his countrymen's fear of this giant. It was a problem for David. How dare he do that? How dare he say what he's been saying? You're not all offended by this? Where's the lineup to shut this guy up? This is faith, and it's childlike faith. It's important faith. He followed the thinking of Moses, who interceded with the same concern over Jehovah's reputation, his great name among the nations, as he cried, "O Lord," bottom of page 2, "why does your anger burn against your people, whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand?" And leave it to Moses to, he always, when he interceded for the people, he always uses God's reputation or name as part of his intercession, right? Why should the Egyptians speak saying, God's reputation, why should they say this? With evil intent, he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and destroy them from the face of the earth. You see what Moses did there? You don't want the Egyptians talking. In other words, God's name, his reputation, to David, making that correlation, was being questioned on both sides. The way the Israelites were acting and the way the Philistines and Goliath himself was acting. God would now fight for David and with David to balance the scales by giving him the power to defeat this giant thug in front of everyone. It's because this is going to be a public display of the Lord's power in David. That some young kid in shepherd's garment is going to defeat some big, huge guy who's basically covered in armor and only his face is exposed. More powerful, stronger, and like I said last week, probably speed was the only thing David had over Goliath. Thus, when David defeated Goliath, the Lord restores his reputation in its proper place. David also had great confidence for the same reason that Joshua and Caleb gave a good report while spying out the land hundreds of years earlier. The topic of conversation when the spies started to talk and make their reports, right? The topic of conversation was the land itself was a good land flowing with milk and honey, but unfortunately, it had many walled, fortified cities, and giants, strong and mighty, lived in the land. In other words, to the other 10, there's no way we could win. I mean, it's great. I mean, you're right. It's a great land, but there's giants there, and the walled cities are facing us. So we're out of luck here. Sorry, Lord. But to Joshua and Caleb, conquering the land, listen, would be like taking candy from a baby. It was so easy because the Lord was with them. So we use that modern expression. It's a great expression. It would, to them, because of their faith, it would be like taking candy from a baby. Why? Because the Lord would be with them and would be totally against the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. He was their enemy. Their walled and fortified cities that they had, which were strong, were now useless. They were useless. You might as well have had no walls. Their defenses has left them because the controller of human history was against them. They had no defenses left. Easy. I remember when I watched the boxing match between Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston. And if you watch that boxing match again, everybody thought that Sonny Liston was going to win that match and that Cassius Clay at the time was too young and inexperienced. And the fight starts, and the announcers you hear, they start to kind of change their tone. And they start to say, oh my goodness, this young kid is better than we thought. I mean, when the two men got in the middle of the ring, Muhammad Ali, who Cassius Clay, towered over Sonny Liston. And Sonny Liston was the baddest man on the planet before Mike Tyson was. So if you know anything about Sonny Liston, they thought he would die first before he lost his title. I mean, he was a beast. And Ali title, he was kind of like towered over him. And they said, ooh, this is the... And then Ali started to use his speed. And about the 4th or 5th round, he's starting to chop Liston's face up. And they all of a sudden realize, and I remember the announcer saying, as he's constantly hitting Sonny Liston with a jab, and Sonny can't get him. He said, easy, this is easy for the kid. So it went from, this kid doesn't have a chance, and the announcer started to say, listen to that fight again. He's there like, easy, he's hitting him easy. They realized that he was going to cruise to an easy victory. Wow. It was so easy. In Numbers 14, we read this. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephthah, of those who spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of their land, for they will be our prey. They're finished. Elohim Kaim is going before us. Yud-Hey Vav-Hey. They're in trouble. They will be our prey. Listen to this next phrase. Their protection has been removed from them. Whatever protection was provided by God as a matter of his grace was now gone. They were now enemies. They were fit for destruction. They're done. Do not fear them, man. And this is what they're trying to plead with their brothers. Oh, come on. We got this. It's easy. When we get in the land, it's going to be like taking candy from a baby. Ooh. Goliath, protection has left him. David understands Goliath is defenseless on the battlefield right now because he's against the true and living God. He was now defenseless. David's fight against Goliath will be like taking candy from a baby. That's what it's going to be like. And that's what was in David's mind, understanding the situation totally. And again, when we look at David's faith next week and we talk about childlike faith and we get into that, I want us to just see how David's mental attitude was totally different than everybody else's, and the reason why he was chosen as God's king. And this is part of the reason why David was chosen in the first place. It wasn't perfect. He'll make some bad mistakes. But his thinking was good. His thinking was lined up with God's thinking. David's faith is the faith that we should have when we face our many trials. Before well, we're not going to move on, but before we actually end today, there is a couple minutes left. So I wanted to see if anybody wanted to make any comment or have any questions. Next week, we will continue at the bottom of page 3. We're going to stop for today. Ken.
To me, this was a spiritual battle where Saul and David's brothers, that was a physical battle, a fleshly battle to them. So God was preparing David as a shepherd boy facing bears and lions in a spiritual way where he had a different type of wisdom on how to fight a battle. So that went into David's process of thinking
Right.
into this.
So to your point, Ken, when David went out and protected the sheep, who was with him? The Lord was with him. So it wasn't like David had to be on the battlefield and all of a sudden God was with him because God, he's at the battles. To David, the Lord was with him when he's protecting the sheep out in the field somewhere just off by himself. And a great example for us. It's a spiritual thing, right? He's always with us when we're driving in our car to wherever we're going, to work in the morning. He's always with us. So to David, the Lord was with him. And the Lord was now going to be with him in this fight. He didn't have anything to worry about. Good point. It's a spiritual thing. Anybody else have a comment? Doc Joe, and it's not really working that well. I'll repeat what you say if it doesn't come out. I don't know what's wrong with it.
You know, I'm really impressed with the things you bring out. I really appreciate that. And I never paid much attention to the double inquiry about the reward that was being offered by the king. But I think the fact that he's going to save on his taxes cheapens the whole message or the whole lesson. But that was interesting. I appreciate that.
Well, I don't want to cheapen it because I would say that David, look, do you think David cared about the reward? Okay, because I think that's very important to establish, and Doc Joe, that's very good. And I'm going to give you my opinion. David could care less about the reward. He wanted that big Philistine's mouth shut. That's what he wanted. He couldn't believe that all of his Israelite brothers and King Saul himself was letting this guy blather on day after day, taunting God. He couldn't believe it. And I think he couldn't believe that people weren't lined up to fight because, look, as a reward for doing the right thing, he was going to get some pretty good rewards. But I don't think David really cared about those things. But I think that's important to bring out. I don't think David he wasn't sitting there putting the rocks in his sling thinking, oh, I can't wait to marry the king's daughter. She's really pretty. I can't wait to be tax-free. Yeah, baby, I'm tax-free. He's not going out there.
Yeah, especially when you think about the fact that if he loses the battle, that means Israel's going to be serving the Philistines, right? They submit themselves as slaves. I mean, to me, that's a bigger price tag than anything. Everything depended on David winning the battle. Yeah.
Although I have to tell you, I'm going to do a spoiler alert, so you can cover yours and go la 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 la. Okay, so we know who wins the battle between David and Goliath. Anybody know that one? I'm sorry, right? David wins. Did the Philistines renege on the Goliath? Okay, so the Israelites probably would have too. So I'm just saying, if David would have been killed, they would have been attacked, I'm sure the Israelites would have just fled. It's just important to bring it out in the story. They reneged, man. They weren't going to, stand to their word.
You bring out some of the history, the living God that was used, Joshua.
Elohim Kayim, yeah.
Yeah, facing the unbelievable circumstances of fortified cities and giants. The 10 spies looked at that as an impossible task. But Joshua and Caleb thought nothing of that, and we have a perfect reason given. But here we have a very interesting thing, the living God. The idea of the living God is that this God is omnipresent. And so when David looks at the circumstances, in the eyes, his viewpoint is that God is not dead. The Philistines did not believe in Jehovah, and even Israel was not resting in Jehovah. It was as if God was dead. But David cites the name of the living God, same as Joshua did, same as Caleb did. Yep. Saul know, and as if God is in our troubles, then faith is important to bring the fact that God is present in our troubles. He's Absolutely. A living God. He's not dead. So often we face difficulties and we think God is dead. He's not here. He's not in these circumstances. Right. He is a living God, and he is then omnipresent, and that's a great application. David knew God, and therefore he could see circumstances differently.
Right.
Where they would see nothing but a dead end, a blind alley, David saw a path. God always provides a way of escape. And so I think one of the great lessons here is that we have this young man who has a divine viewpoint of life, who has been tested with the lion and the bear. He has won the victory. He is a seasoned warrior for God, and so Goliath is just another obstacle, and God is greater than all obstacles we face. And
Absolutely.
so omnipresence, the living God. And we should remember that too.
Right, like we were talking earlier, talking about God is with you when you're driving the car to work. He's with you everywhere you go. David understood that, right? Yeah. So God is everywhere. He was with Israel in this battlefield, and it didn't seem like any of the Israelites had that divine viewpoint, right, Pop? They just were not thinking along those lines. So he's a great lesson for not only them, but a great lesson for us. And we got to think in the same terms. And we'll talk about that next week. We'll talk about this childlike faith. I'm going to close in prayer because it's 35, but I would like to hear from you, Mayor, if you want to, right after hold on, let me close in prayer. Right? Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for your word this morning. Thank you for all those who came out to hear the lesson this morning. Such great applications from the chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, the battle between David and Goliath. It's just chilling and fun and just amazing what happened here on this ancient battlefield, the valley of Elah. So just thank you for all the lessons that you're teaching us and continue to teach us through your word, not only with the Sunday school lessons, but also as Pastor George brings a good Thanksgiving lesson to us today, Lord. Open up our hearts and minds to your word, and I pray that we will be able to bring all these things to our workplace, to our drive to work, and all throughout our work week, Lord. Just influence